Hi folks, we're here for another Talking Democracy talk. I'm Jay, Dr. Jay, Assistant Professor of Political Science here at Fort Hays State University. I have here with me Lucas Rotes. Lucas Rotes is a undergraduate student here at Fort Hays University, a political science major. And we're here to talk a little politics today, American politics. I want to talk about a couple of different things, both the spending fight in government and also the issue that seems at the center of it, whether or not to build a wall on the southern border, immigration politics more broadly speaking. We had here before, the couple of days before what has been the longest government shutdown in American history, some 35-day long government shutdown. The week leading up to it was very contentious. It looked like Congress had reached some broader agreement. In fact, a spending bill was unanimously approved by the Senate. Both Republicans and Democrats approved it. But then within that day, or the next day, the Trump administration, President Trump, had decided that without funding for a wall, at least something like $5.7 billion or $6.5 billion for funding for a wall, that he would not sign a spending agreement. Talks then broke down. The government shutdown took place. 35 days later, we had the longest government shutdown in American history. This hasn't gone away. We could potentially be on our way to another government shutdown here on February 15th or February 16th. Where do you think this is going to go, Lucas? We're looking in the near future. We're only a week away or so from another possible government shutdown. Is there a spending compromise out there? Will it pass Congress? And must it necessarily include funding for the wall?
I mean, necessities, no, obviously it doesn't need one. Will the Republicans make sure it has one? Potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be good for the Trump administration and for potential re-election campaigns for it to include? I think so, definitely. But where it will lead us in the near future is really up in the air in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see. I should say I can see another spending bill going through without it, as we've seen obviously with what kept us from, or what ended our last government shutdown. But is any of it fully a necessity? Probably not. I think they'll continue to probably pass spending bills without it until it actually becomes a bargaining tool the way it had been in this one, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one of the things that I see that's happening here, and I think what Republicans in Congress and also Trump and Trump administration officials are looking at, is that the last government shutdown did not help them politically. In fact, a lot of polls suggest that the majority of Americans blame Republicans and Trump for the government shutdown, not Democrats. There was some political damage that they took from this. I don't think that they have a taste in their mouth for another government shutdown. And I think in that respect, Pelosi and Democrats in the House, as well as Democrats in the Senate, have a little bit more leverage in this situation. How that is going to play out, still very up in the air. We have no idea where this is going to go, whether or not a shutdown is going to take place. I do think, though, and I'm hearing whispers of this from Washington, that they might even have a deal ready tomorrow, Friday. Now, Congress might put together a deal, a compromise that includes some kind of fencing, increase in technology, surveillance at ports of entry, more Border Patrol agents, et cetera, more money for Border Patrol, but not include explicitly $6.5 billion or $5.7 billion, whatever it is, funding for a wall. Now that's going to put the heat on Donald Trump. Is he going to sign a bill that has passed the House and passed the Senate, a comprehensive spending bill that is not a stopgap measure, not another 2-week delay or something like that, but a longer spending bill? Will he sign that without the wall? Now, I don't think anybody really truly knows that except for one person in the world, and that's Donald Trump. But can we speculate here? What do you think? If Trump is really put into a situation, and again, you know, he's got a lot of leverage amongst Republicans in Congress. Their electoral successes are tied to him. He could potentially, he's got enough sway in the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a party of Trump for the time being, and he's got enough leverage and sway to be able to hurt their electoral prospects if they cross him too much. I don't think that's infinite, and I don't think that's static, and I think in some ways that's kind of loosening over time, and congressional Republicans are feeling perhaps a little less beholden and tethered to their support of Trump than even previously, and I think the midterm elections were a factor in that. Yeah. But let's say, you know, Congress puts together a comprehensive spending package. There's an increase for border security, but there's not explicit money set aside for the wall. What do you think is going to go on in Donald Trump's head? How is he going to respond to that? What are his options? I think
his options might be either take the win, a mild win of more border security with the potential, and play it off as some form of lessening or not as much as what the wall is, but fulfilling a minor campaign promise of border security. And I could see him spinning it that way.
Or framing it as a compromise, perhaps.
Framing it as a compromise and saying, you know, it's not exactly what I've been saying as in the wall, but it is an increase in border security. Where does that play out in re-election terms? I don't know. It could fare well for him with moderates. It could hurt his base. Yeah. His base especially wanting the wall to be built. Build that wall is the chant that was for most of his campaign. Yeah. I could see it very much benefiting him with maybe a carryover with moderates, but I could also see it hurting his base. The determination is whether or not his base is strong enough to withhold not getting that specific campaign promise.
Yeah, that's one of the crucial political questions, right? Is to what extent is the base really going to abandon Donald Trump or weaken significantly if he doesn't get exactly what he wants? I'm a little skeptical. I understand the logic and the reasoning behind the base wholesale abandoning him, because this is the central campaign issue on that in which he ran, and the base is more animated about immigration politics than most other policies in our political conversations today. But I'm a little skeptical that it would be a wholesale abandonment. In other words, I really don't think that the base is Ann Coulter 100%. In fact, I've seen a little bit of pushback against Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter is a political commentator. Immigration politics has long animated her positions and her talk about politics. She's very hard to the right of most establishment Republicans. She's come out very, very strong against Trump, calling him weak, calling it the most tear-jerking and pathetic display, the State of the Union address, which I thought I thought Donald Trump handled that really well strategically. And I think that was overall a win for Trump, the State of the Union, because he was able to kind of have his cake and eat it too, if you will. He was able to speak the language of compromise and unity and bipartisanship and some of the things that he hadn't been talking about, but nonetheless remain firm on a couple of different positions. Bring out a wedge issue that helps Republicans, late-term abortions, saying things like, bringing out the socialism bugbear, really for the first time, I think, in the Trump in the Trump presidency, taking on this notion of socialism directly, which I think can help Republicans. I'm not so sure it carries the same weight that it did in the Cold War, and that word socialism doesn't have the same kind of negative value in American politics as it did in the past. But strategically, I think those were wise moves by Trump, and also his insistence on the wall. Now, in the State of the Union, he didn't say very much about the wall. This was one of Ann Coulter's biggest criticisms. She complained that it took like 35 minutes into the speech, and he only mentioned it for a couple of minutes, and then he moved on to a different topic. And so there wasn't much of it wasn't the same kind of rhetoric that Donald Trump had used before. No mention of the previous government shutdown in the State of the Union address. No mention that he's willing to shut down government again, or abide by a shutting down of government again if he doesn't get his wall funding. No mention of that. Just the same kind of stand-pat rhetoric, we need a wall, justification for it, and then sort of left it there. Now, so in other words, I think I'm a little skeptical that the base is really going to wholesale abandon Donald Trump over this issue. If there is some kind of messy compromise somewhere in the middle that includes a lot of border funding and includes fencing or barriers to some degree or another, and whether or not that might affect turnout in 2020. It might be a little less enthusiasm for the base, but I still think the base is going to be solidly with Trump. Do you agree with that, or what do you think?
Especially like with what you were saying with the other issues that he brought up, his base being very anti-socialism, in especially rhetoric, maybe even more so rhetoric than even in belief. They might hold some things that socialism holds also true to their own personal opinion. But
for example, Medicare and Medicaid, right? I mean, there's probably a ton of Trump supporters who are on Medicaid and Medicare, and those are, you know, by definition, socialistic government programs of healthcare delivery, not just insurance. So, you know,
and even from where I'm from, being Western Kansas, I can tell you of many farmers who were huge Trump supporters and would scoff at the word socialism, but would not be where they're at without farm subsidies of some sort, knowing that's not all federal government, it's also a lot of state government to that too. But I think the rhetoric that he used, especially with socialism and that kind of stuff, will help his base. And I think strategically speaking, not bringing up the wall, not bringing up immigration, being something that he has not necessarily failed at, but compared to his full plan, the full everything that he's wanted out of it, it has definitely been more of a failure than a success. And avoiding that and taking the brash from the Ann Coulters, but still livening his base with being very pro-choice, being very anti-socialism, definitely was a good strategic move that he had for this State of the Union address.
And the opportunity was there because, you know, the late-term abortion issue is really coming out of what's happening in Virginia right now. Virginia Democratic Party is completely collapsing and falling apart. Governor Northam calls for him to step down over some yearbook photos and past behaviors, donning blackface, et cetera, et cetera. The lieutenant governor of Virginia, Fairfax, has sexual assault allegations against him, which appear to be very serious in the media. And then the third in line for the Virginia governorship has recently come out and said that, admitted that he donned blackface at parties when he was younger, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that is just on top of a bill that the Virginia legislature passed that legalized late-term abortions. Now, this bill ultimately failed, but the politics of this look terrible for Virginia. Now, Virginia is a crucial state politically. This is not just a battleground state. This is a state that has gone from red to purple, and one might make the argument has gone blue. That this is not a full safety for an electoral college Democratic Party, but increasingly so, Virginia is turning Democratic Party in blue, mostly from the growth of the D.C. suburbs here. So this could be a major setback for the Democratic Party in a key battleground state. Trump has decided to strategically, wisely, I think, make that issue national, bring it out in the State of the Union. And I think you're right. You also bring up a really important point about politics, more broadly speaking. Politics is composed of two things in just governing. We have rhetoric, right? But then we actually have practical policy positions. And those can sometimes be very far apart from one another, right?
Most definitely.
And I think the wall might be an example here. The wall as a symbolic form of politics, as a useful bit of rhetoric to be able to get leverage and to do things in politics might look very differently than what the actual needs are on the border, right? Most undocumented folks in this country overstay visas. Most drugs and human trafficking go through legal ports of entry, right? Neither of those realities, which are basic factual realities, a wall wouldn't solve those things necessarily, right? A wall has to be part of a broader, comprehensive understanding of what to do on the border. But often just the rhetoric of the wall kind of takes up so much space and so much room. Much to the chagrin, in fact, of a lot of conservatives and Republicans. I read a really interesting article in Politico that there are some Republicans out, immigration politics-centered conservatives and Republicans who are, they're not going against the wall or anything, but they're kind of rolling their eyes and shrugging and being like, oh, so much wall rhetoric when the issue of immigration politics is so much bigger.
Absolutely.
So, in what way, here's a key question, I think. In what way did Donald Trump paint himself into a corner here? Now, this is my own objective observations of the Trump administration. Too often, the president has painted himself into a corner and made his life more difficult than it probably should have been. Firing Jim Comey, right? Comments after the Charlottesville situation that went down. Things that are just unnecessary, that are just not political winners for him, sometimes he gets tripped up by, of his own doing, of his own making, painting himself into a corner. Do you see this potentially being the case also with the wall?
Yeah, most potentially. It's kind of tough to speculate that far into it, but I definitely believe that there was a lot of probably conservatives, Republicans that took the wall at a much broader sense, like you were saying. And more so, you have more of your moderate Republicans that are looking at the wall more as a just comprehensive immigration reform, and not so much of the physical wall being built. Whereas some of his base, some of the more conservative, would probably say that the wall is a necessity. The Ann Coulters, again, that would say that the wall was their end-all, be-all to immigration fixing it. Like, fixing it was the wall, and that's all that they needed. So, yeah, it could be painting those people painting Trump into a corner with those people. But where rhetoric goes away and we talk about actual policy again, some of his more moderate base, some of his more non-strict conservative base might actually enjoy his action over his rhetoric. And so that could be another issue come re-election time, is wondering whether or not the moderates do come out in support of the policy and his ability to compromise and worry more about immigration reform and less about the wall.
Yeah, or rhetoric, more generally speaking. I think we can both agree on that. I think that what the challenges that face Trump all the way up until November 2020 right now are ones that can be alleviated and that he can find leverage points on if he goes back to the nitty-gritty details of governing, of policy making, and that sort of thing, and moving and probably minimizing to a certain degree some of the rhetoric that might animate the performance of politics but aren't really going to get a lot of things done. One of the things that could potentially be out here, and I've thought about this the past couple of days just recently, that there are a number of kind of a rock and a hard place situations that Donald Trump has found himself in with regards to the spending bill and with regards to the wall. There are downsides to him even getting the wall and getting funding for the wall. And one of those downsides, I think, is that over time, it will prove very contentious in the courts. You're going to have to eminent domain a lot of private land and private property in order to get this wall built. It might be very contentious in the courts and very difficult to actually build. Once sections are built, I can see the media, and not just liberal media, but I can see the media broadly jumping on stories of holes being dug under walls or people scaling over walls and showing that the wall isn't necessarily as effective as what it might seem. Even if he wins on this issue, there are pitfalls. Potential pitfalls out there. I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen, but there are potential pitfalls for even getting what he wants on this.
Especially in the rhetorical medium, like you're basically the way I heard it. Most of the things you were talking about is rhetoric against him. Then getting the wall, even if it might be effective at what it's made to do, which is to stop illegal immigration from people just walking across the border or whatever, even if it does succeed at that, and maybe in the long term we see the number of illegal immigrants passing just through that form, not from overstayed visas, not from coming through legal entry points, but even if we see a decrease in illegal immigration from people just going across the border, that doesn't mean that he's going to escape the potential rhetoric that could come about from if one person comes across his new wall and finds a media outlet and tells their story, how detrimental that could be to him.
Yeah, we were talking about anecdotal politics earlier today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a definite possibility. And like you said, the rhetoric could end up being so much worse for him from the media if he gets it accomplished. And also, if he doesn't get it accomplished, you can still have the same stuff as well, he's not fulfilling his campaign promises. He's not doing this. He's not doing that. Like you were saying, rock in a hard place.
Yeah.
He can get it done or he can not get it done, and either way,
Yeah.
he's probably not going to be looked at very well at the end of the day.
Yeah, and politics can be ruthless in this way, right? I mean, it sort of, you can often be stuck between two bad choices in politics. And there are downsides to almost every move that you make. We see this in almost every presidency, right? That presidents are often caught between the interests of the party and the interests of the nation, for example. Presidents are caught between messy policies that are complicated and don't have a clear rhetorical, easy to digest message for the public, or just rhetoric where not much gets done. So, presidents are often caught between these things. And here's one assessment that I have broadly about immigration politics. I'm not so sure that in a broader sense, this is going to be a winning political issue for Trump in the sense that he can really expand the base on this issue. There are a number of moderate Republicans who don't give two nickels for immigration. They don't care. They don't care about it. They just don't care about borders. They care about border security, but they don't think that border security is an important political issue, or that undocumented persons are an important political issue. And there are a number of moderate Republicans who this does not rile them up. And I think that this was one of the reasons behind what we saw in the 2018 midterm elections, was that moderate Republicans were losing seats in suburban areas because moderate Republican voters in those suburban areas, this is just not an issue that fuels and animates them and mobilizes them. And mobilization was a major factor. And it allowed for a lot of these moderate Republicans to get replaced by moderate Democrats in these areas. Do you agree or disagree with that? Do you think that the broader issue of immigration politics is overall a winner for Trump? I'm skeptical it is. If I were in his war room and if I were an advisor to the president, I think I would be on the total opposite end of this from Stephen Miller, for example. Stephen Miller is, considered one of the architects of the immigration policy and very much hardliner on this. I'm skeptical that there are big long-term wins. Now, I get the base thing. I get the fact that Trump's base, that this is important to them. But I think Trump has a growing the base problem here. He's got to grow that base, especially for November 2020. I think his electoral chances really rely on it. Yes, he did win in 2016 with a rabid, rock-solid base that was very mobilized, but his opponent in that 2016 presidential election had some pretty high, significant negatives amongst liberals and progressives, as well as conservatives and Republicans. I'm speaking of Hillary Clinton. So I don't think that he's going to come up in 2020 against somebody with the kind of vulnerabilities and negatives that Hillary Clinton brought to that campaign. He might come against an opponent who has less money and has less policy experience than Hillary Clinton, but not with the high negatives in public. So I think he's going into a difficult situation here. What do you think?
I would agree, and I think, as we were talking about earlier, what he talked about during the State of the Union kind of proves that maybe even he or his speechwriters don't think that immigration is a winning topic for him, why he didn't have a whole lot to say about it. Whereas with moderate Republicans, the right to life and being anti-abortion is a key and a crucial topic for them, and maybe doubling down on that. We were talking about how with Virginia and all that being part of the reasoning for him bringing that up, but also, the very successful March for Life had just taken place less than 2 or 3 weeks ago, and piggybacking off of the popularity of that and how much it draws. I think abortion would be a winning issue for him and that moderate Republican base. I think going back and doing more intensive tax reform. I think tax reform was a big win for him earlier last year when they implemented the whole new tax code. I think that's a huge win for him. I think going back to things like that and maybe not doubling down, which he really isn't doubling down on the wall, but worrying less about immigration and drawing in different quote unquote bases of that moderate Republican, moderate Democrat even, and kind of finding those different places that he can really attract those types of voters and mobilize them. Because like you said, I think who he was going up against might have mobilized more people to go vote, more so against her.
Oh, yeah.
Than to necessarily vote for him.
Yeah, I certainly saw that. Yeah.
And if you have a Joe Biden type that is not an offensive person to people on the moderate right, you're not going to get the mobilization as you did against a Hillary Clinton. I don't think there's a lot of people that the Democrats could put up that would have even close to as amount of a mobilization factor to people of the moderate right as Hillary Clinton did. I mean, you could probably say maybe Bernie Sanders, just going back on like what we were talking about earlier about just people on the right having a disdain for the word socialist or socialism. But I still don't think Bernie would get that much of a mobilization to people of the moderate right as Hillary Clinton did. So finding those little things, finding the topics like abortion, finding those topics like tax reform, and different things like that, and worrying much more about that, and maybe doubling down on with our next spending bill, maybe trying to make it as efficient as possible. Maybe using that as a talking point for people who are smaller government people, would much more enjoy to hear that the next spending bill is efficient than maybe it having the wall being put into it. I could see that being a potential thing too.
Yeah, I agree on most of those points, and I think that the, I think that so it historically has been the case that the State of the Union address after a midterm election is usually the first kind of shot to the bow of the president inaugurating the campaign season, and it's the kind of setting the stage for the way in which the president's going to run for re-election, right? So I think that the word socialism was actually a really important word in that State of the Union, and that being at the end of the speech, a culmination of the speech, I think we're going to see, we could very potentially see a much more progressive Democratic Party candidate than Hillary Clinton, right? We've had a number of tax proposals on the progressive left of 70% or 80% marginal tax rates, of taxing the extreme wealth of America. Those things are actually polling quite well, surprisingly well. I think a lot of people are surprised by the way in which those are polling with the public. I'm not saying that they're that's definitely what's going to happen, but the way it's polling looks very different than how those things would be polled even 10 years ago. So I think that might actually contribute to a Democratic nominee being much more progressive than what we saw with Hillary Clinton. And therefore, the sharp debate of the 2020 presidential election could look something like, is the United States going to be a socialist country through tax policy and through a much more radically progressive tax policy, if you will, of a 70% marginal rate, right? As opposed to the kinds of things that Donald Trump had done with regards to permanent decrease in the corporate tax, right? From 34 to 20% and a temporary tax break for individual earners. So if he can, and I think you're right, and I would guess I would frame it this way as well. If Donald Trump can, it's not about abandoning immigration politics or abandoning his position on the wall. It's about adding to it a number of things that can balance out the way in which the public sees where Donald Trump's governing is going and what he wants to do policy-wise, right? That it's got to be more than just that. And I think some of those issues, it remains to be seen how that's going to play out in electoral politics. But I personally would love to have a presidential campaign that were debated and that were argued on the issues of taxation and the economy, as opposed to wall or no wall, which I think is not a debate that I don't think it really favors Democrats or Republicans, to be honest with you. I mean, in a strategic sense, it might give one side leverage over the other, but politics should be more than strategy. Politics should be about a conversation about policy and where you want to go with things. I would rather have a presidential debate be about, are we going to have a 70% marginal tax rate, or are the kinds of corporate tax deductions that we saw in the Trump tax cut, Is that what we want for the future of America? That sounds like a debate we all should have.
Definitely. I think it was after the presidential election when Bernie and Ted Cruz would have their own. They kind of, I think it was on CNN or one of the.
Yeah.
Their own
a town hall,
yeah. Town hall.
Yeah.
Those types of things where they actually debated it
Yeah.
because, I think we all can agree on that would have been the much more interesting, philosophical presidential run than Hillary versus Trump.
Yeah.
Being as they are fairly similar politically, or have been in the past. And that about the only thing they disagreed on in this last election was the buzzwords that they were being used. And I think it will be. I think it will be a much more of an ideological 2020 race, which I think favors whoever is going to go up against Trump, because ideologically I don't think he is the strongest. And if you put him up in a debate where we're talking taxation that he isn't well prepared for, it could be kind of detrimental to him. But at the same time, he has been a successful businessman. He is very intelligent when it comes to these types of things. And what he did in his only tax plan that he's done, was very popular with his base, and with people who weren't necessarily in his base. A lot of people benefited from it, and I think a debate on taxes would be a very, very interesting debate to have come 2020.
Yeah, well, things are just going to get hotter from here in terms of electoral politics. It's going to be exciting to see what happens leading up to November 2020. And this was good. This was fun. We should do this again, Lucas.
Absolutely.
I'm Jay. We're going to close it off for now. Thanks for joining us again for Talking Democracy. We'll see you next time.